In the heart of London, near the Grand Buckingham Palace, Corporal James Whittaker stood tall and proud. His red tunic gleamed under the soft sunlight, and his towering bearskin hat made him look like a figure out of history books. Tourists from all over the world gathered around, their cameras clicking endlessly as they tried to capture the essence of British tradition. Children pointed excitedly at him, while adults whispered stories about the royal guards to one another. But no matter how much noise or movement surrounded him, Corporal Whittaker didn't flinch. He was trained for this: to stand still, to remain calm, and to represent something bigger than himself. The park nearby buzzed with life. Families strolled along the pathways, couples sat on benches sharing quiet conversations, and joggers moved past in steady rhythms. It seemed like just another peaceful day in the city. For Corporal Whittaker, it was routine. Every shift brought its own challenges, but he had learned long ago that being a guard wasn't just about wearing the uniform. It was about embodying discipline, patience, and respect. These were values drilled into him during his years of training, and today they would be put to the ultimate test. As the clock ticked by, the crowd grew thicker. Some people posed for photos beside him, pretending to push him over or lean on his shoulder. Others simply admired the precision of his stance, the way his boots clicked perfectly together, the straight line of his back, and the unwavering focus in his eyes. To them, he might have seemed almost robotic, but inside, Corporal Whittaker was very human. He noticed every detail around him: the laughter of children, the rustling leaves in the breeze, and even the faint smell of freshly cut grass. Little did he know, trouble was brewing not far away. A man named Victor Hargrove walked briskly down the path leading toward the palace gates. Victor wasn't there to admire the scenery or take pictures. He carried an air of hostility, his jaw clenched tightly as if chewing on bitter thoughts. At his side trotted a large German shepherd, its muscles rippling beneath sleek black fur. The dog's ears pricked up, alert and ready to obey its master's commands. Unlike the cheerful atmosphere around them, Victor radiated negativity, muttering under his breath about people who think they're better than everyone else. Victor spotted Corporal Whittaker standing stoically near the entrance. Something about the sight of the guard in his polished uniform ignited a spark of anger deep within him. His grip tightened on the dog's leash as memories of past grievances flooded his mind. To Victor, the guard symbolized everything he despised: authority, tradition, and what he perceived as elitism. Without realizing it, he began walking faster, closing the distance between himself and the unsuspecting soldier. His lips curled into a sneer as he muttered insults under his breath, his voice low but venomous. Meanwhile, Corporal Whittaker remained oblivious to the storm heading his way. He continued scanning the area casually, ensuring everything was in order. Occasionally, he'd nod politely when someone greeted him or smiled warmly at a child waving enthusiastically. To anyone watching, he appeared completely at ease. Yet beneath his composed exterior, his instincts were sharp, honed by years of service. He knew that anything could happen at any moment, and he was prepared to face whatever came his way. Unbeknownst to both men, fate was about to bring their paths crashing together in a way neither could have anticipated. The calm serenity of the park, the admiration of tourists, and the quiet dignity of the royal guard, all of it was about to be shattered by one man's unchecked rage. And when that moment arrived, Corporal Whittaker's true character would shine through brighter than ever before. Victor Hargrove's steps quickened as he approached Corporal Whittaker, his anger simmering just below the surface. The German shepherd at his side seemed to sense its master's mood, growling softly and pulling against the leash with restless energy. Victor's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of the guard, standing so still, so proud, so seemingly untouchable. To Victor, this wasn't just a man doing his job. It was a symbol of everything he resented. His grip tightened on the leash, knuckles turning white as his frustration boiled over. "Look at you," Victor spat under his breath, loud enough for those nearby to hear, but not quite directed at the guard yet. standing there like you own the place. Think you're better than everyone else, don't you? His words were laced with bitterness, each syllable dripping with disdain. A few passers-by glanced nervously in his direction, sensing the tension building around him. But Victor didn't care. He was too consumed by his own resentment to notice or care about the discomfort he was causing. As he drew closer, Victor's voice grew louder, more pointed. "What makes you so special? That fancy hat? That shiny uniform?" He gestured wildly, mocking the very things that represented honor and tradition to others. Some tourists exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or step back. One woman clutched her child's hand tightly, steering them away from the volatile man. Others lingered, curiosity keeping them rooted in place despite the growing unease. Corporal Whittaker remained motionless, his posture unwavering. Inside, he could feel the weight of Victor's words pressing down on him, but his training kept him grounded. He had faced insults before, sometimes subtle jabs, other times outright hostility. But nothing quite like this. Still, he reminded himself why he chose this path: to serve, to protect, and to uphold the values he believed in. Breaking his stance now would only give power to the negativity swirling around him. But Victor wasn't done. Emboldened by the lack of response, he stepped even closer, close enough that the dog began circling restlessly at his feet. "You think you're brave, standing there like some statue while real people struggle every day." Victor sneered, leaning in slightly as if trying to provoke a reaction. When none came, his expression darkened further. "Maybe I'll show you what bravery really looks like." With that, Victor yanked hard on the leash, jerking the German shepherd forward. The dog barked sharply, its teeth flashing as it lunged toward Corporal Whittaker. Panic rippled through the crowd as screams erupted. Parents grabbed their children, pulling them out of harm's way, while others stumbled backward, unsure of what to do. The once peaceful atmosphere dissolved into chaos in mere seconds. The German shepherd snarled ferociously, straining against the leash as Victor shouted encouragement. "Go on. Show him who's boss," he yelled, his voice cutting through the commotion. For a moment, it seemed impossible to believe what was happening. A man deliberately setting his dog on a soldier simply because of his uniform and heritage. Yet here it was, unfolding right before everyone's eyes. Despite the danger looming inches away, Corporal Whittaker stayed rooted in place. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins, but he refused to let fear dictate his actions. Instead, he focused on maintaining control, drawing upon years of discipline to keep his composure intact. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about representing something greater than himself. If he faltered now, it wouldn't just be his dignity at stake. It would be the respect and integrity of the institution he served. Victor watched intently, waiting for the guard to break, to flinch, to shout, to retaliate. But Corporal Whittaker did none of those things. Instead, he shifted subtly, using his ceremonial rifle as a barrier between himself and the dog without making any aggressive moves. His movements were deliberate, calculated, designed to de-escalate rather than provoke. Even in the face of such blatant hostility, he chose restraint over reaction. The contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. While Victor thrived on chaos, feeding off conflict and aggression, Corporal Whittaker embodied calmness and resolve. Each second stretched longer than the last, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. And though the outcome was far from certain, one thing was clear: this encounter would leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. The story of Corporal James Whittaker and young Ethan spread like wildfire, capturing the hearts of people not just in London but across the nation. News outlets picked up the incident within hours, airing footage of the confrontation alongside interviews with witnesses who had been present that day. Social media platforms buzzed with posts praising the guard's composure and the boy's bravery, turning both individuals into symbols of resilience and courage. Hashtags like #StandWithWhitaker and #EthanTheHero trended for days, sparking conversations about standing up against hatred and injustice. Corporal Whittaker found himself thrust into the spotlight, something he never sought or expected. Reporters flocked to Buckingham Palace, eager to speak with a man whose unwavering dignity had inspired so many. When asked how he managed to stay calm during such a tense situation, Whittaker humbly credited his training and upbringing. "I was taught that true strength lies not in fighting back, but in rising above," he explained during one interview. "That day wasn't about me. It was about honoring the values I swore to uphold." His words resonated deeply with audiences, striking a chord in a world often divided by anger and misunderstanding. People admired not only his discipline, but also his ability to see beyond Victor's aggression. Whittaker emphasized that while he understood why someone might feel powerless or frustrated, channeling those emotions into hatred only perpetuated harm. His message was clear: compassion and restraint could break cycles of negativity, even when faced with hostility. Meanwhile, Ethan became a local hero. Schools invited him to share his story with students, encouraging them to stand up for what was right, no matter their age. Teachers praised his actions as an example of moral courage, highlighting how stepping forward, even when scared, could inspire others to do the same. During one assembly, a teacher introduced Ethan by saying, "This young man reminds us that bravery isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right despite your fears." The room erupted in applause as Ethan shyly took the stage, his cheeks flushing red under the attention. Ethan's family embraced the newfound recognition, using it as an opportunity to promote kindness and empathy. They spoke openly about teaching their son the importance of helping others and standing firm in his beliefs. "We always tell Ethan that heroes aren't born. They're made through small choices every day," his mother shared during a television interview. "He chose to act selflessly that day, and we couldn't be prouder." As messages of support poured in from around the globe, both Whittaker and Ethan received countless letters and gifts. Children sent drawings of soldiers protecting parks, while adults wrote heartfelt notes thanking them for restoring faith in humanity. One letter stood out to Whittaker, a note from a veteran who said, "You reminded me why I wore the uniform all those years ago. Thank you for showing the world what it means to serve with honor." The bond between the soldier and the boy grew stronger with time. Whittaker visited Ethan and his family regularly, bringing stories from his service days and offering guidance whenever the boy needed advice. In return, Ethan's infectious enthusiasm reminded Whittaker of the joy in life's simplest moments. Together, they attended community events, speaking about unity and the power of standing together against prejudice. Their partnership became a beacon of hope, proving that connections forged in adversity could lead to lasting change. Local authorities also took steps to address the underlying issues highlighted by the incident. Anti-racism workshops were organized in schools and workplaces, focusing on fostering understanding and respect among diverse groups. Victor's actions served as a sobering reminder of the work still needed to combat discrimination, prompting leaders to recommit to building inclusive communities. While Victor faced legal consequences for his behavior, his case underscored how public accountability could spark meaningful dialogue. For Corporal Whittaker and Ethan, however, the real reward lay in knowing they had touched lives. Whether through Whittaker's quiet resolve or Ethan's bold intervention, they showed the world that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when guided by integrity and compassion. Their story wasn't just about one moment of triumph. It was a call to action, urging everyone to play their part in creating a kinder, more united society. And as they walked side by side through the park where it all began, surrounded by smiling faces and grateful hearts, it was clear that their legacy would endure far beyond that unforgettable day. As the park officers held Victor firmly in place, his bravado began to crumble under the weight of accountability. The once aggressive man now shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with both the security team and the crowd that surrounded him. His dog, finally subdued, cowered slightly behind his legs as if sensing its master's growing unease. "This is ridiculous," Victor muttered again, though this time his voice lacked conviction. It was clear he hadn't anticipated the swift and united response from those around him. The arrival of the police added another layer of seriousness to the situation. Two officers approached, their uniforms crisp and their expressions stern. One carried a notepad, jotting down details as witnesses eagerly stepped forward to recount what they had seen. He set his dog on the guard. One woman exclaimed, pointing accusingly at Victor. And he was saying awful things, racist slurs, threats. It was horrifying. Others chimed in, their voices overlapping in a chorus of outrage. Ethan's intervention became a focal point of the narrative, with several people praising the boy for his bravery. Victor tried to defend himself, stammering excuses and attempting to downplay his actions. "I didn't mean anything by it," he claimed, his tone defensive but unconvincing. It was just a joke gone wrong, but no one was buying it. The evidence was undeniable. Multiple videos captured on tourists' phones showed Victor deliberately provoking the confrontation, unleashing his dog, and hurling insults laced with hatred. When one officer replayed a clip directly in front of Victor, his face turned pale. For the first time, he seemed to realize the gravity of what he had done. Meanwhile, Corporal Whittaker stood quietly to the side, observing the proceedings with a mix of relief and reflection. He felt grateful for the support of the crowd and the quick actions of the authorities, but he also couldn't help but think about the broader implications of the incident. This wasn't just about one man's misplaced anger. It was a stark reminder of the prejudices that still lingered in society. Yet, as he glanced over at Ethan, who was being comforted by his parents, he found hope. Acts of courage like Ethan's prove that compassion and empathy could shine even in the darkest moments. When the officers finished questioning witnesses, they turned their attention to Corporal Whittaker. "Are you all right, sir?" one asked, his tone respectful. Whittaker nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you for your concern," he replied. "I'm fine, thanks to everyone here, including young Ethan." The officer nodded approvingly, then gestured toward Victor. "We'll take care of this properly. You won't have to worry about him again today." With that, Victor was handcuffed and led away, his protests fading into the distance as the crowd watched silently. Some people clapped softly, while others simply sighed in relief. The tension that had gripped the park just moments earlier dissipated, replaced by a sense of justice being served. A few children ran back to their families, laughter returning to the air as normalcy slowly resumed. Afterward, Corporal Whittaker knelt once more beside Ethan, who looked up at him with wide, shining eyes. "You saved me today," Whittaker said warmly, his gratitude evident in every word. "Not many people would have done what you did, not even adults. I'm proud of you." Ethan beamed, clearly thrilled by the praise. "Anyone would have done the same," he mumbled shyly, though Whittaker shook his head. "No, son, not everyone would. That's what makes you special." Ethan's parents stood nearby, visibly emotional. They thanked Whittaker profusely, hugging their son tightly as tears welled up in their eyes. "We're so proud of him," Ethan's mother whispered, her voice trembling. "But we're also grateful to you for staying calm and showing us all how to handle such a difficult situation." Whittaker nodded humbly, acknowledging their kind words without taking full credit. "It takes a village," he said with a smile. Today, we were that village. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the park, the crowd began to disperse. Families returned to their picnics, couples resumed their walks, and children went back to playing. Yet the events of the day lingered in everyone's minds, a powerful reminder of the difference individuals could make when they chose kindness over cruelty, action over apathy. For Corporal Whittaker, the experience reinforced his belief in humanity's potential for good. And for Ethan, it marked the beginning of something extraordinary, a newfound confidence in standing up for what was right, no matter how daunting the challenge might seem. Together, they had turned a moment of hostility into one of unity, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Just as the tension reached its breaking point, a small but determined figure emerged from the edge of the crowd. It was Ethan, a 10-year-old boy with messy brown hair and wide, curious eyes that sparkled with bravery. Clutching a stick no longer than his arm, he stepped forward without hesitation, positioning himself between Corporal Whittaker and the snarling German shepherd. His voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the chaos like a bell in a storm. "Leave him alone," Ethan shouted, waving the stick wildly to distract the dog. "You can't hurt him." The sudden intervention startled everyone. Victor, the guard, and even the crowd. For a moment, all eyes were on the young boy who had dared to step into the middle of such a dangerous situation. His courage was undeniable, his small frame radiating a strength far beyond his years. Victor froze, caught off guard by the unexpected turn of events. His grip on the leash loosened slightly as he stared at Ethan, momentarily unsure of how to respond. The German shepherd, too, seemed confused by the new presence. Its growl softened, and it took a hesitant step back, distracted by the stick now being waved in its direction. Ethan stood firm, his feet planted firmly on the ground despite the fear that must have been bubbling inside him. The crowd erupted into murmurs of surprise and admiration. "Did you see that?" One woman whispered to another, her voice tinged with awe. "That kid's got guts." Others nodded in agreement, their expressions softening as they watched the boy stand up for what was right. Even those who had initially fled the scene began creeping closer, drawn by the unfolding drama and inspired by the child's boldness. Corporal Whittaker, still holding his rifle steady, glanced down at Ethan with a mixture of gratitude and concern. He wanted to tell the boy to step back, to stay safe, but something stopped him. There was a purity in Ethan's actions, a selflessness that reminded the guard of why he chose this path in the first place. Here was a child willing to risk his own safety to defend someone he didn't even know. It was a powerful reminder of the goodness that existed in the world, even in moments of darkness. Ethan's bravery gave nearby park security officers the opening they needed. 2 uniformed guards hurried over, their authoritative voices rising above the commotion. "Sir, control your dog immediately." One of them barked at Victor, his tone leaving no room for argument. The other officer moved swiftly to position himself between the dog and Corporal Whittaker, using a baton to create additional distance. Their presence brought a sense of order to the chaotic scene, calming the frightened onlookers. Victor, realizing he was now outnumbered and under scrutiny, tried to regain control of the situation. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, tugging hard on the leash to pull the dog back toward him. But the damage was done. The crowd had turned against him, their disapproving stares burning into his skin. Some people openly booed, while others clapped in support of Ethan and the arriving security team. Victor's face flushed red, not just with anger, but with embarrassment. As the park officers questioned Victor and examined the scene, Corporal Whittaker finally broke his silence. Kneeling down slowly so as not to startle Ethan, he placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "You didn't have to do that, but you did. That takes real courage." Ethan looked up at the guard, his cheeks flushed, but his expression proud. "I couldn't just stand there and watch," he replied simply. "You're protecting us. Someone should protect you too." The exchange touched everyone within earshot. A few people wiped away tears, moved by the bond forming between the soldier and the child. Others applauded quietly, their respect for both individuals growing with each passing second. Even the park officers paused briefly to acknowledge the moment before continuing their work. With the immediate threat neutralized, the focus shifted to addressing Victor's behavior. One officer radioed for backup, requesting police assistance to handle the escalating situation. Meanwhile, witnesses eagerly volunteered to share their accounts of what had happened, eager to ensure justice would be served. The atmosphere in the park transformed once again, from chaos to solidarity, from fear to hope. For Corporal Whittaker, the incident reinforced the importance of standing firm in the face of adversity. But more than that, it reminded him that acts of kindness and bravery could inspire others to do the same. As he rose to his feet, offering Ethan a warm smile, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they had shown the world that even in the darkest moments, light could shine through. And sometimes, that light came from the most unexpected places. Victor's frustration mounted with each passing second. He had expected the guard to crumble under pressure, to lash out, to shout, or at the very least, to show some sign of weakness. But Corporal Whittaker's composure was unshakable, and it left Victor feeling more exposed than ever. His insults grew louder, his tone sharper, but they bounced off the soldier like raindrops on a windowpane. The angrier Victor became, the calmer Corporal Whittaker appeared, creating an unsettling dynamic that drew murmurs of disbelief from the crowd. "You're nothing." Victor spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Just a glorified statue playing dress-up." He yanked the leash again, urging the German shepherd to press closer, its growls growing fiercer. But even as the dog strained against its restraint, snapping inches away from the rifle, Corporal Whittaker didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his grip slightly, ensuring the weapon remained a non-threatening yet effective barrier. There was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. The crowd watched in stunned silence, their initial shock giving way to admiration for the guard's restraint. A teenage girl whispered to her friend, "He's not even scared. Look at him." Her words carried a mix of awe and disbelief, sentiments shared by many around them. For Victor, however, this growing respect for the guard only fueled his rage further. It wasn't supposed to go this way. He wanted to dominate, to humiliate, to prove a point. But instead, he found himself losing control of the narrative. Inside, Corporal Whittaker wrestled with his own emotions. While his exterior remained calm, his mind raced with thoughts about what was happening. He couldn't help but hear his father's voice echoing in his head. True strength isn't about overpowering others. It's about rising above hatred. Those words had guided him through countless challenges, both personal and professional. Now, standing face to face with hostility, he clung to them tightly. Breaking his stance or retaliating would only validate Victor's behavior, and that was something he refused to do. But it wasn't easy. Each insult cut deep, striking at parts of his identity that he held dear. Victor's taunts weren't just directed at the uniform. They were aimed at who Corporal Whittaker was as a person. Yet, rather than letting anger consume him, he chose to channel those feelings into focus. Every breath he took steadied not just his body, but also his spirit. This wasn't just about enduring an attack. It was about proving that dignity could withstand even the harshest storms. As the confrontation dragged on, subtle shifts began to occur. Some members of the crowd started calling out to Victor, their voices filled with disapproval. "Leave him alone." One woman shouted boldly, stepping forward despite her obvious fear. Others joined in, their collective outrage slowly turning the tide against Victor. Even the German shepherd seemed less eager now, its barks softer and its movements sluggish, as if sensing the shift in energy. For Corporal Whittaker, these small acts of support mattered deeply. They reminded him that he wasn't alone, that there were people willing to stand up for what was right, even when faced with ugliness. Still, he knew better than to let his guard down. Victor was unpredictable, and the situation could escalate at any moment. So he stayed vigilant, keeping his attention split between the dog and its owner while maintaining his composed demeanor. Meanwhile, Victor's confidence began to waver. The longer the standoff continued, the more isolated he felt. His attempts to provoke a reaction had failed spectacularly, leaving him looking foolish in front of the growing audience. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his grip on the leash tightened until his knuckles turned white. For the first time since the ordeal began, doubt crept into his expression, a fleeting glimpse of vulnerability that betrayed his bravado. In that moment, Corporal Whittaker realized something powerful. Victor's aggression stemmed not from strength, but from insecurity. The man wasn't attacking because he believed in his superiority. He was lashing out because he felt powerless. Understanding this gave the guard a new perspective. Instead of viewing Victor as an enemy, he saw him as someone trapped in their own anger, a person whose actions spoke louder than their words ever could. The realization didn't make the situation easier, but it did give Corporal Whittaker clarity. He understood now that his role wasn't just to endure the attack, it was to rise above it. By refusing to stoop to Victor's level, he was sending a message not just to the man in front of him, but to everyone watching. Hatred might try to tear people down, but resilience and grace could build bridges where none seemed possible. And so, as the tension reached its peak, Corporal Whittaker stood taller than ever. His unwavering composure transformed him from a mere figure in a red tunic to a symbol of. As the German Shepherd lunged forward, its teeth gleaming and snarls echoing through the park, time seemed to slow down. The crowd gasped in unison, their faces frozen in shock and fear. Some people instinctively covered their mouths, while others shielded their children from the unfolding chaos. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Everything hinged on what Corporal Whittaker would do next. But Corporal Whittaker didn't panic. Years of rigorous training kicked in, guiding him to respond with precision and calmness. He knew that reacting impulsively could escalate the situation further, and losing his composure wasn't an option. Instead, he relied on his instincts, moving deliberately and methodically. With measured grace, he adjusted his stance, positioning his ceremonial rifle as a protective barrier between himself and the dog. The polished wood of the weapon caught the sunlight, glinting faintly as if reminding everyone of the dignity it represented. The dog snapped and growled, straining against its leash as Victor shouted encouragement. "Get him." Victor barked, his voice laced with venom. "Show him who's in charge." His words cut through the air, sharp and cruel, but they didn't shake Corporal Whittaker's resolve. Instead, the guard focused intently on the animal, reading its movements carefully. Every twitch of the dog's muscles, every flash of its teeth, it all registered in his mind like pieces of a puzzle he needed to solve. Despite the danger mere inches away, Corporal Whittaker remained steadfast. His eyes locked onto Victor's, unwavering and steady. There was no anger in his gaze, no hint of fear or retaliation, just quiet determination. It was as though he was silently communicating a message. "You can try to break me, but you won't succeed." This wasn't just about defending himself. It was about standing firm in the face of hatred, showing that such behavior wouldn't diminish his character or the values he stood for. Around them, the scene grew increasingly chaotic. Tourists scrambled for safety, some tripping over benches or bumping into one another in their haste to escape. A young mother clutched her toddler tightly, whispering reassurances even as tears streamed down her face. An elderly man nearby muttered under his breath, "This shouldn't be happening." His voice trembled with disbelief. Yet amidst the turmoil, Corporal Whittaker stood like a rock in a raging river, unmoved by the storm swirling around him. Victor, realizing that his initial attempt to provoke a reaction had failed, became more agitated. "What's wrong with you?" He yelled at the guard, his face reddening with frustration. "Aren't you even scared? Fight back." But Corporal Whittaker didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he shifted slightly, angling his body to keep the dog at bay without making any sudden or aggressive moves. His actions were calculated, not to harm, but to protect. The rifle remained firmly in his hands, a symbol of discipline rather than violence. For those watching, the contrast between the two men couldn't have been starker. Victor thrived on chaos, feeding off conflict and aggression. His body language screamed hostility, his fists clenched tightly around the leash as he urged the dog onward. In stark contrast, Corporal Whittaker radiated calmness. His breathing was steady, his posture upright, and his expression neutral. Even under attack, he exuded a quiet strength that commanded respect. As the seconds ticked by, something remarkable began to happen. The crowd, initially paralyzed by fear, started to shift. People began murmuring among themselves, their voices tinged with admiration for the guard's composure. One man whispered, "Look at him, he hasn't budged." Another woman nodded, saying, "He's not letting that guy win." Slowly but surely, the tide of energy in the park changed. What had begun as a moment of terror transformed into something else entirely, a testament to resilience and self-control. Corporal Whittaker's thoughts drifted briefly to his father, a man who had always taught him the importance of inner strength. True courage isn't about fighting back, his father used to say. It's about knowing when to hold your ground. Those words echoed in his mind now, grounding him in the midst of the chaos. He reminded himself that this wasn't just about him. It was about honoring the principles he'd sworn to uphold. No amount of hatred or provocation could take that away from him. And then, almost imperceptibly, a flicker of doubt crossed Victor's face. For all his bluster and bravado, he hadn't managed to crack the guard's armor. If anything, Corporal Whittaker's unwavering composure only highlighted the ugliness of Victor's actions. The imbalance between them, the calm versus the chaos, was becoming impossible to ignore. Months after the incident in the park, life had settled into a new rhythm for Corporal James Whittaker and young Ethan. Yet the impact of their actions continued to ripple outward, touching lives in ways neither of them could have imagined. The bond they'd formed that day blossomed into a deep friendship, one built on mutual respect and shared values. They became unlikely ambassadors for unity, using their story to inspire others to stand up against hatred and embrace compassion. Corporal Whittaker received formal recognition for his exemplary conduct during the ordeal. At a ceremony held at Buckingham Palace, he was awarded a commendation for maintaining discipline under extreme provocation. As military officials praised his actions, Whittaker humbly redirected the credit to those who supported him that day, especially Ethan. "I didn't face this alone," he said during his speech, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "A young boy reminded me what courage truly looks like. If we can all find that kind of bravery within ourselves, imagine the world we could create." Ethan, too, earned widespread acclaim. His school established an annual award named after him, the Ethan Courage Award, to honor students who demonstrated exceptional bravery and kindness. On the first presentation day, Ethan stood proudly beside the recipient, beaming as the crowd applauded. It wasn't just about celebrating individual acts of heroism. It was about fostering a culture where standing up for others became second nature. Teachers noticed a shift among students, who now approached challenges with greater empathy and determination. Together, Whittaker and Ethan participated in community outreach programs aimed at promoting understanding and breaking down barriers. They visited schools, sharing their story with children from diverse backgrounds. Whittaker spoke about the importance of discipline, patience, and rising above negativity, while Ethan encouraged kids to trust their instincts and do what felt right, even when it was hard. Their dynamic was infectious. Older students listened intently, hanging onto every word, while younger ones eagerly asked questions, inspired by the idea that anyone could make a difference. One particularly memorable event took place at a local community center, where families gathered for a day of workshops focused on anti-racism and inclusivity. Whittaker and Ethan led a session together, recounting their experience in the park and answering questions from attendees. A teenage girl raised her hand hesitantly, asking, "What if I'm scared to speak up? What if no one listens?" Whittaker smiled warmly before responding. "Fear is natural," he said, "but remember, you don't have to face it alone. Start small. Stand beside someone being treated unfairly, or simply offer a kind word. Those little moments add up." Ethan chimed in, adding his perspective. "Yeah, and sometimes people will listen, even if they don't show it right away. Just knowing someone cares can make a big difference." The room erupted in applause, and the girl nodded thoughtfully, visibly reassured by their advice. Moments like these reinforced the pair's belief in the power of storytelling, not just to entertain, but to educate and empower. Beyond public appearances, Whittaker and Ethan worked closely with organizations dedicated to combating racism and fostering unity. They collaborated on campaigns encouraging open dialogue about prejudice and privilege, urging people to confront uncomfortable truths rather than shy away from them. Their message was simple yet profound. Change begins with listening. By hearing each other's stories and acknowledging shared humanity, communities could bridge divides and build lasting connections. The transformation sparked by their efforts wasn't limited to grand gestures or large-scale initiatives. It manifested in everyday interactions, too. Parents reported seeing their children stand up for classmates being teased. Neighbors began reaching out to one another, bridging gaps created by differences in culture or background. Even strangers exchanged warmer smiles on the street, reminded by Whittaker and Ethan's example that kindness costs nothing but means everything. As time passed, the park near Buckingham Palace became a symbol of resilience and hope. Visitors often stopped to take photos not just of the guards, but also of a small plaque installed near the spot where the incident occurred. Inscribed on it were words chosen by Whittaker and Ethan. Courage unites us, compassion strengthens us, and kindness heals us. Tourists read the inscription aloud, reflecting on its meaning as they walked past. For Corporal Whittaker, the experience reaffirmed his commitment to service, not just as a soldier but as a role model. For Ethan, it instilled a lifelong confidence in his ability to effect change. Together, they proved that acts of courage, no matter how small, could leave an indelible mark,